The next thing I have the pleasure of doing is introducing this morning's plenary panel, which is on igniting innovation, a vision for the clean energy future. Gina McCarthy articulated some of the broad national policies needed to achieve a clean energy future. This next panel of experts is going to explore what the future is really going to look like, describe the new creative business models, investment approaches, innovative technologies, and policies that'll get us there. The panel will begin with remarks by our own Mary Nichols, chair of the California Air Resources Board, who will talk about how California is implementing AB 32, the California Global Warming Solutions Act. And then following Mary Nichols' opening remarks, Steve McBee, president and CEO of NRG Home, and Ray Wood, managing director and head of U.S. Power and Renewables for Bank of America, will join Mary for an in-depth conversation. So please join me in welcoming Mary Nichols, Steve McBee, and Ray Wood. Thank you, and have fun.
Okay, I'm going to start from here and then move over to join my panel. I get to have two roles this morning, which is very exciting. And I couldn't be happier with my placement in this program than getting to follow Gina McCarthy, who is just doing such a fabulous job of navigating the president's climate action plan through all the various political and legal thickets and doing it in a way, as you heard, that's engaging people from all sides. I know if you read the morning environmental publications that at least fill up my inbox every morning, all you get are the attacks and the controversies. But she's absolutely right that there's a lot happening beneath the surface that is indicating that those who have the responsibilities for actually acting on these regulations that she's working on are already hard at work figuring out ways to do it, and to do it cost effectively and in ways that benefit their own states and their own businesses too. So it's great that she's able to come out here and get a little dose of our support and enthusiasm, and then go back into the fray again. So California, of course, has the unique distinction of being the only state that has a comprehensive climate program. It's called AB 32, and we're getting close to its 10th anniversary. It's kind of hard to believe, actually, but we are very much on track to meet the goal that's already been superseded. The original goal was to get to 1990 levels of greenhouse gas pollution by 2020, and to do it in a way that also demonstrated that we could continue to grow our economy and to attract investment into California, and that is, in fact, happening. We said at the time, and you hear this now, of course, from politicians everywhere you go, that you don't have to trade growth for reducing emissions, but making that actually happen is not just a matter of saying it. It's required a lot of actions by a lot of different organizations and individuals, and so it's great to be able to have that example out there to be able to point to that has showed that California continues to be among the most efficient and least carbon intensive economies in the world, and that we have been able to continue to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions while still continuing to grow. So now we have the great pleasure of being able to work with other economies, including countries and subnational organizations around the world that want to know how we did it in California, and to take what works for them away from this example and be able to put it to work in their own countries, and whether it's from provinces in China that are part of the pilot for trading programs, or whether it's our sister states in the Pacific Northwest that are moving into low carbon fuels, and other states as well. We spend a lot of our time now interacting with others because we understand very well that this is not something that we're doing just for California, that the problem that we're actually trying to address is indeed a global problem, and that without partners and without allies and competitors, frankly, we won't make it to where we need to go. It's also pretty exciting and daunting working for a governor who's not satisfied just to announce the successes that we're having on our old goals, but who's planted the flag even further out because based on the science, he is convinced that we need to be setting an interim goal a little farther out into the future. So just a few weeks ago, the governor announced by executive order a 2030 target to reduce our emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, a target that has been adopted by some European countries, but we're the first in North America to sign on to that science-based proposition. And thank you. Thanks. Let me tell you that as a person who contributed to his speech in which he made that announcement and went through all of the documentation that we had about how you could actually achieve that goal, it's something that we believe very strongly we can do, but we don't know exactly yet how we're going to do it. There's a lot of issues and questions about policies and programs that will be the ones that will actually get us to where we need to go. We do know that we're going to have to aim for a 50% reduction in the amount of petroleum that we're using by then, that we're going to need to have at least 50% renewable electricity serving all of our needs here, including transportation needs, because electricity becomes increasingly important as a fuel. We also know that our building stock, which will still be with us in 2030, has a lot of room to become more efficient, and we've set a target of doubling the efficiency of our current building stock. But we're also looking at the other piece of the equation, which is our natural resources. We are blessed in California with forests, with grazing land, with prime agricultural land, challenged as it is by the ongoing drought, which in turn we know is being made worse as a result of the amount of global warming that's already going on. And we need to figure out how to allow those resources to operate as effective stores of carbon as well, to play a role in balancing our emissions. So these are big and definitely bold goals, but we do believe that they are achievable as well. 2030 is a little bit farther out, but it's still within our ability to model and to plan, and we do intend to get to work at every level of government, at the state and local level, to find the steps that are going to get us to where we need to go. One element of all of this is, of course, having well-designed regulations. We know that without them, we don't get to the most cost-effective mix of measures. We also know that there are certain sectors that, without a regulatory framework in place, are not going to be able to contribute as they need to solving the overall reduction goals that we have. But we also know that we have to continue and to improve upon the ways in which we're using other mechanisms as well, including the investment of the funds that are now flowing into the state's coffers, a good problem to have, but the fact that we have money now to spend as a result of the cap and trade program and the small amount of allowances that the state itself held back, about 10%, that go through the legislative budgeting process, although it gives us a wonderful opportunity to talk about ways in which we can use the funds to reinforce the goals and to provide other benefits in communities as well. It also means that we're in the political process, because there is nothing that is more quintessentially the role of the legislature and the elected leadership than figuring out how to spend revenue. So the challenge of spending it well and wisely as investment is truly an important one, and we take it very seriously. We need to create incentives for others who have not been as actively engaged in this investment arena to find ways to become more competitive so that they are not left behind when what they need is a little bit of an assist to move into a more competitive role. And we also need to be looking at how our education and job training programs in communities can be better aligned with our efforts to grow and maintain a cleaner energy economy. So this is the work of every single agency and every single player, really. We have a running start, which is good, but we have a lot more to do. This year, now that the governor has put out the executive order and the legislature is looking at what they're going to do next in terms of our renewable electricity standard and other parameters, we have to begin a new effort to create a kind of a framework plan called a scoping plan, which will include among the elements the next levels of renewable portfolio standards, as well as bringing in some of the sectors like agriculture and forestry that have not been as actively engaged up until now. And last but not least, we do have to comply with the EPA Clean Power Plan. And while we think that the plan was designed in a way that makes it pretty easy for California to comply based on what we're already doing, again, we're not alone. We are consumers of electricity that's generated all over the western United States, and we're part of a very large grid that's tied together by the need to keep the lights on. So working together with other states, many of which are not necessarily enthusiastic about even saying the words climate change, much less doing anything about it, is going to require some flexibility and some innovation on all of our parts to design regional programs that will make it more cost-effective and more efficient for everybody to achieve these overarching goals. The questions that were asked earlier, which highlighted the communities and the places that feel left behind, left out, or that they're not really part of this new economy that we talk about so enthusiastically here. The challenge for those of us who are blessed perhaps with more sun and wind and that have all sorts of entrepreneurs and investments working in these areas is how we can play a role in helping the transition for those who are not so blessed as well. Clearly, the business community and innovations that it brings, that many people in this room bring, is a big part of that. And so I am delighted to now move into my role as moderator and question asker for my panel. So let me just quickly introduce the two people that are already sitting up here that we'll be talking with, and I'll move over and take my seat there. First of all, I want to introduce Steve McBee, who is the president and CEO of NRG Home. Steve is passionate about creating solutions for global energy and climate challenges through new technologies, new business models, and the creation of new consumer markets. He works for a very cool organization. He is joined by Ray Wood, who serves as a managing director and head of the Power and Renewables Group at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, where he leads coverage teams across a variety of client sectors, including regulated utilities, independent power, alternative energy, and private equity sponsors. If you understand all those words, please raise your hand. I think I understand most of them, at least. And I'm going to find out more as I move over to the panel here, because as you can tell, I'm a regulator, I'm a policy person. I get to interact with these guys only occasionally, so I'm looking forward to learning from them as well. Thank you.
Welcome to our table.
So here I am at the table, and now I would like to start. I'll start with NRG, I guess, since I introduced Steve first. So I'm one of many people who has received copies of NRG's CEO David Crane's statements about climate change. It's music to my ears when I read what he has to say about this topic, about climate change being the issue of our time, the issue for the electric power industry. But tell me a little bit about your piece of NRG and how the company as a whole looks at climate and energy issues, and particularly how your piece of it, NRG Home, is bringing innovation into this marketplace.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. And, Mary Nichols and Gina McCarthy, right? I mean, this is a serious situation here. These are two of the best, political leaders in the country that are doing really, game-changing work for issues that we all care about. Well said. And I just would like to, it was a little bit of it was kind of hidden in the intro, but Mary's comment was, Steve works for a really cool company. Now, there are not very many cool IPPs, right? David Crane has made it cool. So, no, I think, so David's a great visionary, and he's the reason, why I decided 5 months ago to take this opportunity. And I think the view at NRG, and the reason that we're reorganizing our business and really putting a lot of acceleration behind diversifying our business strategy is a couple reasons. One is, in the letter that you mentioned, that David wrote, climate change is the challenge of our times, and NRG is a major player in the IPP space, is a big part of the challenge and needs to be part of the solution. And so we have a moral obligation to act on that, and that's part of what's driving the reset on the strategy. The second thing that's driving the reset on the strategy is, if you're a business that has traditionally relied on the grid, which is a big, dumb, centralized machine in a world that is going decentralized, digital, and modular, it's not a good place to be. So the goal is to disrupt ourselves at a time and in a way of our choosing, as opposed to being disrupted by others. And so NRG Home, which is the business that I run, is the big part of that growth story, and it's all of the consumer-facing businesses that we have at NRG. It's our large retail business that serves almost 3 million customers with conventional electricity in the Northeast and Texas. We also have a rapidly growing residential solar business, electric vehicle, plug-in infrastructure business. We're in the connected home space. We're doing some really cool things in water efficiency. We're going to be doing some very cool things shortly in the storage space. So it's everything that we have that's consumer-facing. And if there's sort of one thing that I could leave with everybody in here today, and I think it actually really gets at what we're all interested in here, which is how do we put more sustainable, energy into the hands of consumers and into the world more broadly, we're doing this totally novel thing at NRG Home. We're focusing on the customer, right? We're thinking about the customer. We're not thinking about the meter. We're not thinking about line capacity. We're actually thinking about how can we organize around the customer, put the customer at the center of how we think about strategy, put the customer at the center of how we compete and how we ultimately create value. And a lot of people, I'm not an energy industry person, as a consumer-facing business with 3.5 million customers, that seems like a logical strategy to me. But there have been a lot of people in the energy space that go, that's kind of crazy, focus on your customer. What we're trying to do, Mary, is take a page from the playbook that we see happening around us in virtually every consumer category, right? Music and entertainment and transport and lodging and publishing and media and everything, what you see there is these long-standing centralized models of service are breaking down, and they're giving ways to decentralized, demand-driven service models, which are empowering the consumer in the marketplace in ways that are totally unprecedented. Consumers are in control, whether it's how you order your transport, how and when you play your music, how you get your entertainment options. That's going to happen in the energy space. We know people are going to want to control and generate and ultimately share more of their own energy, be able to access their power wherever they are for whatever they need it for. So by providing that to them, it's great for our business. We have happy customers who are having an energy experience that doesn't suck, that's good, right, that is empowering. And in the course of doing that, if you think about everything a consumer could do to take control of their energy experience, it's almost by definition going to be cleaner and more sustainable. So it gets to the point that you both talked about with Gina, which is, there is a real opportunity here where unbelievable value creation meets the opportunity to create a tremendous amount of social change. And those things are not in conflict with each other. They're in harmony with each other if you can get the business model put together the right way. And that is the thing I love the most about my business is the work we're doing to drive value for our shareholders not only is in line with, but it reinforces all of the social change that we hope to make as we sort of move this business model forward.
So speaking of business models, one of the organizations that's probably least known for being innovative and flexible is banking, right? And
Well,
Ray?
thank you very much.
Yeah, I was right across right across the bow there.
I want to bring you into this conversation because I know you have a role
I guess
here
you do, yeah, that's great, thank you.
in financing. You're playing a big role here, though, in providing financing, as your bio indicated, for some of these ideas that Steve has just been talking about. So tell us a little bit about how the Bank of America views this climate and energy landscape and where the climate is flowing, where the capital is flowing, and how you anticipate things moving forward in the next few years.
Mary, thank you very much, and Steve, thank you for your comments. We're delighted to be here as well. It's an easy question, but it's a complicated answer. We've been focused on the clean energy sector and climate change for a long time. Our CEO, Brian Moynihan, articulated that, a $20 billion goal. Banks measure things in dollars or other currencies, and the initial goal was $20 billion. To be involved with that, whether it's lending or underwriting or advisory. We've upped that, I think, the end of 2013 to $50 billion of aggregate capital dedicated to the space over the next 10 years. And I will tell you, in 2014, we were probably closer to $10 billion. So I think that 10-year goal is probably turning out to be conservative, although it was a big announcement at the time. We work with large integrated utilities. As you went through my bio, there are a number of major actors, both from venture capital and small companies who have disruptive technology, to independent power producers, to the new energy service providers who are providing disruptive changes to the utility sector, as well as to large corporates, and then all of the manufacturers out there globally. We work with all of them. And our clean energy platform is dedicated to assisting them in a market. It's a good policy for us. It's the right moral answer, and it's also good business. The return on invested capital in the renewable sector is vibrant right now, and that shocks a lot of people when you think about how low oil prices are right now and how low natural gas prices are right now. I mean, why would you invest in clean energy when you have such cheap fossil fuels out there? The reality is that the clean energy prices have come down dramatically, largely due to very supportive government policy here and abroad, as well as major technological changes that have brought that cost down to the point where it's near grid parity. And when you talk about into the home, it is now through retail prices of power in at least 12 states and changing. That's disruptive. In a sector that is, the utility sector is probably a $500 billion business annually in the United States alone, so think about it globally. And you couldn't think of a more core sector to global development than providing power and energy to people. So our role, the innovation now that we're seeing is a transition from renewables being one where it was really just bank lending and subsidy-oriented investment 10 years ago to being much broader and going into the broader capital markets. We're now seeing debt securitizations for these major infrastructure projects that bring down the cost of capital by 200 to 300 basis points, which is 2 to 3%, which, when you're talking about capital displacing fossil fuels, that brings the cost down dramatically. We're also seeing it on the equity side, the innovation, if you can call it that, with yieldcos, and bringing the cost of capital down and attracting institutional and retail investors into the US and global capital markets to be able to invest in pure play, clean energy, contracted renewable platforms. The market reaction has been nothing short of spectacular. These stocks have done extremely well. You look at the energy industry that has this thing called MLPs, Master Limited Partnerships. Some of you have heard of them, probably invest in them. That's about a $600 billion business. We now have, I think, 6 or 7 yieldcos, which are pretty simple structures, and their aggregate market cap now is about $25 billion, so several more on the way. So we're in the very early innings, since it's baseball season. It's a lot of seasons right now, but it's also baseball season. We're in the very early innings of innovation and bringing low-cost capital, and this is capital displacing variable cost. And so while the innovations on the asset side and bringing down the cost of delivery, whether it's on solar or wind or energy efficiency, is vital, having the financial markets there and having them be liquid is also important for this displacement.
Okay, so let's delve into this a little bit further and maybe back to Steve a bit. You brought up the issue of how government policy is affecting the interests of investors in these areas. And I'm curious to know from your perspective whether you feel that the policy regulatory framework that's out there right now is working as it should, or whether there are challenges there from your perspective that you think need to be fixed in order to actually allow the company to do what it wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think both. I mean, I think that it's working in some places incredibly well. I think it's working in California incredibly well. I mean, California is, not only one of the most important, innovator markets for new energy technology in the U.S., but I think it's one of the most important, if not the most important, sort of adopter market in the world. And that's in large part to the leadership married by you, by the governor, and just the broad political support that that the elected officials in the state enjoy by the constituents who they serve to do something and be aggressive and get after it on climate change. Where it's working not at all, I mean, Gina McCarthy aside, who again I think is epic and is doing an unbelievable job of just every day breaking down walls and sending out to the world some kind of a price signal on carbon. I mean, the legislative process in Washington is a disaster, right? I mean, the policy discussion on Capitol Hill is the nicest thing you could say about it is it's limited, so the reason, and I work that side, I care deeply about climate change and resource depletion and globalization and urbanization globally, particularly in the developing world, and all of those things. I mean, any one of those things happening on its own would be sort of existential, right? But all of them happening at the same time and kind of the extent to which each one reinforces the other three, it's a huge challenge. And in a perfect world, political leadership would be there, not just in Washington, but globally. But political leadership at that level is not going to arrive anytime soon. And so I 1,000% agree with what Gina said, which is the key to getting this done, right, is for big companies who've got the throw weight to do something about it, to look at these huge problems and not just view them as huge problems, but view them as huge opportunities, take a market-based approach to solve for them, create a lot of value for their shareholders, but produce a lot of positive social change along the way. One of the people whose counsel I sought out when I first took this opportunity was Tom Steyer. And Tom, everybody in here knows the incredible work he's doing on trying to move the political math. But Tom's view is that the best thing you can do if you care about climate change is make the business work, create a lot of shareholder value. So I think that the policies are critically important. It would be great if we could have a single standard and a single price signal that was easy for the market to understand that came out of Washington. You could put a price signal on carbon, you could do away with kind of everything else because I think the market would react, but that's not happening. So the leadership in the States is huge, and I think solar is such a great example of that. I mean, solar is, the cost curves are just coming down, and so adoption cycles are accelerating, and every time the adoption cycles accelerate another increment, the costs come down another increment, and it's this like beautiful cycle. And none of that would be possible if it weren't for the leadership in places like California, if it weren't for the ITC at the federal level. You know, everybody's concerned about the ITC, which is propping up a lot of the residential solar industry today, coming down from 30% to 10% in 2016. I'm not worried about it because prices are dropping so quickly and adoption is happening so quickly as a result of that. And people aren't buying residential, they're not buying our residential solar products for the most part because they want to be sustainable. They're buying it because it's less expensive, right? And so the more that happens, the less those incentives matter. They're actually doing exactly what they're designed for, which is to boost the market, drive early adoption, which brings down the prices, which then allows those businesses to exist and to be profitable without any subsidies. So I think it's working great in some areas. It would be really excellent if we could get a little political leadership out of Washington, but you got to be kind of reality-based about that.
You know, of course, it's music to my ears when people say good things about California, but we are only one of 50 states, and as I think everybody knows, there are challenges that we face trying to operate as though we were an island, and we don't want to be an island.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear maybe from you, Ray, since you also operate at the national level, what you're seeing out there in other states, and what are some of the obstacles as well as some of the opportunities that you see out there for advancing investments in this area.
Well, it's a very upbeat message in terms of how much capital is now flowing into renewables and clean energy, and that's due to the cost curve, and it's due to we've recovered from the financial crisis, largely recovered. So the markets are very efficient right now, whether you're investing debt or equity, and companies are thinking about growing, and their shareholders are rewarding them, so they are putting more money. In fact, I think over the last 2 years combined, the biggest single generation source added into our country's grid has been wind and solar. So renewables, we used to call it alternative energy, it really is core energy now, so it's outpacing gas. You know, I think it's very hard to find a new coal plant being built or a new nuclear plant, and those are being done, if they are at all, under state regulation, which is if you build it, you can charge, as opposed to what will the market pay. So that's the good news. The bad news is, even though this is good and the returns on capital are above the cost of capital, so wealth is being created, there are winners and losers. And in certain states that are blessed with these resources, the influx of renewables is bigger than in other states. Utilities have been allowed for decades, they've had a requirement to serve all of us and provide reliable energy. And so they need to get a fair return on the investments they've already made. And so many of them are challenged by losing the most creditworthy customers who are now able to use energy efficiency or put solar on their roofs. It's in Hawaii, the penetration rate is about 10%. And it's sunny in Hawaii, right? It's windy in Hawaii with the trade winds. And it's also a very high price of power in Hawaii because they turn bunker oil into electricity, which we don't really do here in the continental United States. We usually turn gas into electricity. So that's where the laboratory has been for renewables. And in Germany, when they shut down all the nukes and they allowed a lot of distributed solar, the utility stocks were decimated. So I think the regulators do have a challenge, and the U.S. power industry has always been regulated at both the state and the federal level, as well as the local level. So that communication is unwieldy sometimes. It's hard to get quick change. No one knows that better than the EPA. But that's the reality we're dealing with. We can't tap our feet together and wish that away. So we need to come up with policies that everyone can agree on, and we need to allow a transition so that utilities can have a glide path down to a revised role where the homeowner has more choice, but their requirement to serve is still earns a fair return for their shareholders. And I think that's the challenge we're going to have over the next several years. And it's made more acute by how quickly technology is changing. I think 2 weeks ago, Elon Musk had a presentation at Tesla. They've got the Gigafactory in Nevada, and they're now talking about having backup lithium-ion batteries in many homes for as little as $3,000. So if you think about being able to have your solar during the day and back it up with a battery, have your electric vehicle, I'm not sure every utility loves that dream. But that's the reality of our future, is we have more choice and more distributed options, including with assets. And with that comes change. And it's a heavily regulated sector. So we're in the middle of that, and we think it's going reasonably well, but there will be legal challenges in the judiciary system, as well as each state handling it differently.
Yes, I think maybe Steve might have some follow-up comments on that with respect to how utilities are responding to these challenges and to what you're doing. Do you feel that they are changing their business models or trying to change their business models in ways that respond to this change in consumer opportunities and preferences?
Yeah, I gotta be careful. This is sort of under the if you can't say something nice rule, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to make a judgment about what utilities are or aren't doing. I mean, some are being quite progressive. Some seem to be, sort of pursuing more like a strategy.
Well, it's
of
fair
hope,
to say
right?
they operate in a highly regulated environment.
They do.
So you don't have to blame them for the situation.
They're in a tough
that they're
situation. I just think that the inevitability, we all know how this story ends, right? The question is just kind of what chapter in the book are we on? Are we, still in the first couple chapters, or are we reading the last chapter and the dam's going to break? But I mean, to Ray's point, the technology is just accelerating so quickly. And, I thought, the Musk announcement was good, although, we got some ideas too. So don't you'll be hearing from us shortly.
Not stealing David's thunder.
Yeah, I just, just to be clear. So stay tuned on that. But it's not just what's happening with technology that's, specific and unique to the energy space. It's just what's happening in the world, Technology is probably advancing right now. You go to Silicon Valley right now, it's a very inspiring experience because technology development is probably happening faster than any time in the human experience, right? How quickly it's happening, and it's because of unbelievably rapid, increasing computer speeds, limitless storage capacity, hyperspeed networks, and the digitization of everything. And so, I think when you're trying to, I remember when I took this job 5.5 months ago, I said, guys, what are we doing on storage? I said, storage, it's a 2025 thing. Well, now all of a sudden it's a 2018 thing, And I just think that if you're trying to make a bet on where the technology is going, it is much, nobody ever, especially in the energy industry, conservative industry, people are very concerned about getting out onto the perimeter. You don't want to be too early. You don't want, I think you're much better off being out on the edge and suffering the consequences of being too early than modulating your position and getting buried because you were too late. Yeah. And late goes to, the gap between late and early, there's a very thin line.
Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I think, let's taking a step back. This is a global industry, which sounds trite now to even say, but if you think about China putting together about 15 to 20 gigawatts a year of solar, half of which is utility scale and half of which is distributed solar.
Yeah.
Probably a little different than your strategy, but important nevertheless. India, the premier announced a plan to have 100 gigawatts of solar built, which if you put that in dollar terms is probably $200 billion, including all the cost of deployment, not just the equipment. And and then Japan has undergone a dramatic shift towards solar. Brazil has a lot of hydro, and they're adding quite a bit of wind. Mexico has major plans. The list goes on, but anecdotally, if you look at what it's going to take to be a leader, our regulators, our governments, and our corporate actors and investors need to work together to retain U.S. leadership on innovation so we can be competitive in one of the biggest and fastest growing markets in the world.
So I have a sheaf of questions. However, this is a fast-moving and dynamic program, and I have to move on towards allowing for the audience to have some questions as well. So there are some people wandering around with microphones, I'm told, and we will take questions from the audience. I'm hoping that I can get a couple questions first before we respond, just so we get a sense of whether there's a way to group them. So yes, I can see you out there.
Yeah, hi, good morning, and thank you for your leadership and guidance on this. In the field of small hydro, one of the issues in California is it's under 20 megawatts is classified as renewable, and yet that frequently includes hydro that blocks cell-mounted bearing streams. And so one of the secondary consequences of looking for renewables in hydro, particularly small hydro, is the impact on the environment, the impact on, in California and elsewhere, on endangered fish, no less elsewhere around the world on agricultural areas, large population areas. And do you have any thoughts on how guidance is being given or should be given in development of small hydro and other hydro projects? Thank you.
Okay, so a question about small hydro. Let's just see if that will, whether we can group them together a little bit. Other questions?
I'm Jennifer Krill from Earthworks. We work on extractive industries, and it's so heartening to hear all this terrific news on the uptake of renewables. And my question, particularly for Bank of America, is if you could talk a little bit about what you're doing about the remaining, what we hope is a short residual fossil fuel future, what you're doing on coal, and what we can do on fossil fuels in the grid that we have right now.
So what's going to happen to the conventional fuels during the transition period that we're in? Is that the question? Okay. And there's another, let's try one more. Okay.
Right over here.
There? I'm having a little trouble.
Yeah, hi, this is Andy Behar from As You Sow. Just a question for NRG about your funding of carbon capture and sequestration. I know you guys have been spending a lot of money on that. It's not necessarily a technology that's been proven or will actually reduce fossil fuels. I think what you guys are doing in the renewable space is fantastic, but if you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
So these are pretty resource-specific kinds of questions, but you want to give it a shot?
I think both the hydro and the extractive question, you're probably more equipped than I'm, and I'm actually not equipped to answer any of these questions, as it turns out.
Well, that's okay. Go ahead
but that
anyway.
doesn't stop me from
No,
actually
of
having a
course.
point of view. Yeah. The Petronova project, which I think the gentleman in the back was referring to, the carbon capture.
Right.
Yeah, that's in a different business. It's not at NRG Home, but I will tell you that it's it's David Crane's view and it's NRG's view that regardless of what the trend lines look like on coal-fired generation, it's not going away tomorrow. And so the key, and not in the U.S. and not globally. And so this is an attempt to take a big move to try to find a disruptive way to allow that to happen in a way that is as clean as it can possibly be, just recognizing the reality of that resource being a part of the mix globally for a while. So, I'm happy to talk to you offline on that or hook you up with someone at NRG that is more substantively involved in that, but that's kind of the highest level answer.
Okay, Ray?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. We work with a number of developers across several fuel types. Most prevalent now is those developing wind and solar in North America. Certainly in Latin America, there is some hydro development, and there's limited hydro development here. All development, we're talking about generating electricity from some resource, and by definition, there are disruptions in that environmentally, and those are heavily regulated, and there's a series of federal, state, and local laws to protect the environment, to protect constituents. There's ample opportunity, or there is opportunity, whether it's ample or not, opportunity for naysayers to come in or interested parties to opine on whether this disruption is worth it. And there's an assessment of need, an assessment of what's the cost to do that. And that's true for wind. Wind can be disruptive to bird life. That's true for solar. As you saw in the Mojave Desert, there was a prohibition for a while because of the desert tortoise and other animals. It's a very delicate ecosystem. And it's certainly true for hydro for the reasons the gentleman articulated. Through all that, the system is supposed to work. It provides several opportunities for interested parties to opine, and only after all those permits are met, which is why development requires such a high rate of return. It is so risky. Once you get all of those permits, then and only then would someone like a Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, or another financial institution be willing to lend money against those contracts to buy the equipment and deploy it and construct it so that it could then produce the electricity to sell, generally under a long-term contract. So a lot of the efficiencies in the market that we talked about, at least in the financing markets, have been on the deployment side. After the asset is built, what is its cost of capital? But it remains extremely thorny, whether it's at the home to get permits to put it on your roof, or whether it's in the desert, or whether it's in West Texas in a wind farm. There's a whole series of trials and tribulations developers have to go through, and that's very expensive and fraught with peril. But nevertheless, the systems are generally working, and I think deployment's happening.
So I can just comment on the geological sequestration and carbon capture issue that, you know, we've been interested for a long time in California in taking advantage of the fact that we have geological formations that are highly suitable for carbon sequestration. We've got a lot of CO2 that's being used in, particularly in oil operations now in the state. And we have yet to see a project come together that can put the elements together with the financing and actually take advantage of some of the money that the federal government has had on the table for quite a long time now to promote this technology. And maybe that's an example of how when you try to bite off something really big, even though everybody can see that there's a lot of advantage to it, you just don't seem to have all the pieces in place that could actually make it happen. I don't know quite when that's going to happen.
Well, that's at least from our perspective, that's the great role of government here, is to provide that bridge to when the market's accepting it. So now the market accepts wind and solar and the cost of capital is very low. For years we've had the production tax credit, or you referred to the investment tax credit, ITC for short, on the solar side, as well as accelerated depreciation, which for those of you in the room means you get your money back faster from the federal government and perhaps the state government, and there's other renewable portfolio standards. But if something looks risky for investors or financial institutions, whether it's debt or equity or something in between, and if it looks expensive and it looks risky, it's very hard to mobilize the capital. So the government loan guarantee program, other methods to streamline that and provide some backdrop, while that may be expensive in the short term for the government, the benefits in the long term to attracting that capital once it's utility scale would be really awesome, and something I would say the subsidies have been a very good return for the federal government, given the jobs that have been created and the amount of deployment we've had, and how much the fossil fuels have been shut down as a consequence. Remember, load growth in this country is not really growing. Mm-hmm. And so all of this new generation, most of it is displacing existing generation.
So we've been told that actually the thing that probably California government could do that would make the most difference in terms of moving this sequestration process forward would be to come up with a approved methodology for calculating the credits that would be gained, and how you would actually do the accounting for the carbon that's saved, not for the dollar value of it, but just to say over a period of time what the actual value of that CO2 would be. So that's probably going to be the next stage for us, is to try to put out a protocol for how you actually can quantify the savings that you'd get. That's another role that government can play. We have time for a couple more questions, so we'll point back in this corner here.
Is this working? Yeah, there we go. I'm Tobias Schultz from SCS Global Services, and most of this conversation is focused on renewable energy technologies, which, as you mentioned, used to be called alternative energy technologies. My question is about, I'll call them alternative nuclear-based technologies. So I know that uranium reactors are in decline in most of the developed world, but my question is about, not so much about fusion, which is still kind of in the theoretical stage, but thorium-based reactors. They were tested in the US, and India, I know, is considering them, seriously deploying them over the next few decades. So I wonder, you at NRG, or if any of your experience dealing with other utility providers have ever looked at serious deployment of thorium-based reactors as a way to have a no-carbon fuel source, alternative to renewables?
I was really hoping that question was going to go to, because
Anybody have a comment
that seems
on this
way
one?
above my pay grade. No, I don't have a point of view on that because my business is consumer facing, but you might have a point of view on that. So if I could just hand that to you. Did you see how that worked?
Great job.
Of course he has a
Great
point of
job.
view. You know, he has a point.
I
mean,
love
he's
the
got
fact
it
that
all.
banking is a client service business and that NRG is one of our clients. And Steve, I want to thank you again.
nice.
Yeah.
No,
Have I told you what an excellent job that you've done for us?
all kidding aside, certainly nuclear, we've been talking about not only disruptions and wind and solar, but we've been talking about, not just because Steve is here, but because where the money seems to be flowing is more consumer choice and technologies behind the meter. And what you're talking about is very disruptive and worthy innovation at utility scale nuclear. And the time certainly is right to think about new ways to produce nuclear power, to generate nuclear power, given how compelling its cost curve can be and given the environmental benefits. We have not seen a project like that, utility scale, that has come to us with an engineering report and a series of warranties by the manufacturer that would allow us to provide financing. Doesn't mean we can't see that, but it's very capital intensive up front, and you'll find, as we also saw in the biofuel space, totally different technology, the first couple of times you take a very large project like that and try to get it financed, the naysayers are quite strong. But we would certainly be open to financing a variety of technologies.
That's great. You heard it here. Okay, I think we probably have time for one more question. Back over in that corner there.
Guiltily as an eco-human at Bank of America, and I personally have been trying to move my money into only sustainable funds. And so I'm wondering, when I go into a Bank of America and I ask people if they have any information about what Bank of America is doing to be green, they usually think I'm talking about a sofa. So I'm wondering if you can tell me what Bank of America is doing to move its investments and to guide investors towards more sustainable and human companies that have good human rights records. Thank you.
Question for you.
Yeah, no, I got that.
You want me to take that one?
The regulators are here to help us, right?
We're going to mandate that you put that information out, right?
Look, it's an excellent question. We're a very large bank. Some calls too big to fail. So we have a large retail business, both branches for commercial banking. You go in talk to a teller and you make deposits and payroll. And we have with our Merrill Lynch and U.S. Trust business, we have a large money brokerage business. There are a number of products out there, depending on suitability for the investor, that allow you to invest in a whole series of sectors, including green bonds or sustainable equity index funds. Those are true both in the United States and outside the United States. I'm on the investment banking and wholesale side, dealing with larger clients. I'm not personally aware of exactly what products we provide to the consumer in that regard, but I know there are several products out there, and there's been the money flows into. It's not only a good thing to do, but it's also a very good business right now, given the interest. I would say that I think the Bloomberg Green Energy Index over the last 2 years is up about 150%, plus or minus. And so let's just call that 75% a year. That's probably outperforming the overall index pretty well. Now, we're not going to talk about the last 10 years, because one of the sectors that was most hurt with the financial crisis was, in fact, this clean energy sector, because of its reliance on external capital. But I think not only Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, but other financial institutions are giving their consumers what they want, their customers what they want, and providing more investment opportunities. I don't know down at the branch level what opportunities there are, for example, with certificates of deposits and things of that nature, but I'll look into it.
I'm going to take the liberty of interpreting the question a little bit more broadly, so I give you a chance to say something. And that is, your company, while the part of it, you're here to talk about, is definitely in the forward part of the transition. Not all of NRG is about renewable energy. You still have substantial petroleum as well. And so tell us a little bit about how you reconcile those two things in an overall approach to sustainability.
I thought you were just going to close on that. I thought we
Not gonna
no,
make
it's
it
great.
easy.
We have a lot of coal, right? I mean, the coal is what drives the share price, right? And so still today, even the awe-inspiring things that are happening at NRG Home aside, that's still where the market views the business. And so, I mean, it's a couple, and I'd like to answer the question and then, maybe just a very short, question to put to the audience. Yeah, but one of the things I'm really proud of about NRG is, we have one of the most aggressive sustainability goals in the industry. We're reducing our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. That was a very bold and a very unconventional, non-consensus move for an IPP company to make. So, despite the fact that we've got this huge coal fleet that still drives the share price and really in a lot of ways still defines the company, even on that side of the business, we're being really aggressive about how we can bring down our carbon footprint and really set a model for sustainability in the big energy space. I think that, one of the things that's just really interesting, we talked a lot about the investment side sort of in terms of financing projects. One of the challenges that we have at NRG, and it's not just at NRG, but it's one that I deal with, is we have a great solar franchise inside the company. We have a great commercial and residential solar franchise inside the company. We have a rapidly growing electric vehicle business, electric vehicle infrastructure business. We're doing a lot of cool stuff in connected home, all the things I talked about at the beginning of the session. We have a really hard time getting our value-driven, EBITDA-oriented power sector investors to assign value to that. And we have a lot of innovative energy investors and investors that invest in disruption and growth, who love these businesses, but have a hard time getting a point of view about commodity price risk, which you have to have if you're going to invest in an IPP. So the question is, if it's true, and I really do think it is, that the biggest companies in the world have the best opportunity to make the biggest difference in dealing with carbon and climate change and sustainability, what is the business model, right, that will allow companies that are looking at adjacent opportunities to extract value from the equity markets for that work? It's not just NRG. I've talked to and worked with aerospace companies and systems integrators and big industrials who can do the math on where the world is going, and they're doing things inside of those companies that if they were standalone businesses would generate a tremendous amount of interest from the capital markets, but because their conventional investors can't model it, don't understand it, it's trapped, right? And that's a disincentive for a lot of big companies to go hard on doing some of this adjacent work inside the business. So it's not really, it's very indirect to your question, but if there are people in this room who have ideas about that, we are open for business on that question, because we have got to be able to unlock that value and make sure that we get the right alignment with our investors for all of the things that we're doing inside the company.
So isn't that the price on carbon? Isn't that what we're talking about?
Price on carbon certainly helps. I think NRG, Steve's being somewhat self-deprecating, NRG was the first company to issue a yield co to highlight that value of renewables, clean energy, solar at the time, and wind since, as well as contracted thermal, clean thermal. That's in the portfolio. There was a dramatic stock price reaction to that, to the affirmative.
Yep.
That stock continues to attract a great deal of interest. The institutional list, the list of institutional shareholders is a who's who list of reputable players. There's a large retail shareholding as well. Other companies have followed. So that innovation, it doesn't stop the challenge of what you articulated, but it certainly highlights value in a way for investors to look at the totality of what NRG and other players are. And that's a really exciting development in the market today.
I think that's a great point to end on. I want to thank this panel. I think it's a great opening for today's further discussion. Sustainability is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing practice that we're all engaged in, and we'll look forward to further discussions with all of you as we move forward. So thank you very much.